Happy Friday, everyone. Hello, hello. So good to see you. We have been expecting you. We're just giving it a couple minutes for everyone to get settled into our virtual learning space. We're always so grateful when people show up and want to be a part of this community. This is Intentional Conversations VodCast, and I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I have the honor of serving as the founder, working with an amazing team at Nika White Consulting. And we have been certainly in preparation for today's podcast. And I have a wonderful guest co-host that I really look forward to introducing momentarily. But before we get there, I would love for you all to take to the chat. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. We know that we have some repeat visitors, which we are always welcome to see those familiar faces, but sometimes we also have a lot of newcomers. And so it's always great for us just to know where people are joining the conversation from. So go to the chat and place that information there. And also, if you desire for this community to connect with you, even outside of this window of time, then feel free to drop your LinkedIn information into the chat as well. And by the way, speaking of LinkedIn, we are live on LinkedIn today as well. So we are definitely watching the comments there. And as people are engaging, we're bringing some of that energy over to our Zoom vodcast community as well. I also want to let you know that at NWC, we do practice disability inclusion. So we have closed caption that's available for those that may need it. So I wanted to put that into your hearing. And once again, you have joined Intentional Conversations, where we intersect conversations between diversity, equity, and inclusion, and leadership and belonging. Welcome. Let the conversation begin indeed, and I am so grateful to serve as your host today. Once again, for those of you who just may be joining, I am Dr. Nika White, and this is Intentional Conversations VodCast. And I want to just take a moment to welcome each of you. Cameras today are encouraged, but they're certainly not required. We always love to see smiling faces, but we always anticipate that there's some who are just joining us in an auditory capacity, and that's completely fine. I want to take a moment just to share a couple things that we like to socialize, particularly in the month of February. While we are getting towards the end of the month, we are still in the month, and I will continue to leverage the national observance of Black history to let you know that Black history is American history, and it belongs into all of our conversations, all of our schools. We need to make sure that we're continuing to provide that level of history and knowledge to all of our young people and to the adults. I love to see adults this month who are taking the time to educate themselves and share information about Black history. But I don't want us to forget it once we hit March, right? We need to think about Black history all throughout the year, but certainly February is a time that we amplify that point even more so. So for those who have been a part of this community, you know that I recently released book number 3 in partnership with Forbes Books, Inclusion Uncomplicated. It is now available wherever you like to get your books, and I certainly appreciate your support. It's all about providing a guide to help people simplify DEI, to unravel the knot that binds humanity together. So I hope that you will get your copy, and I would love to be in conversation with you about what you're learning and how you're feeling about what you're learning while you're on this journey. The book is available in audio capacity on Kindle as well as in hard copy. And we are also developing lots of learning experiences around Inclusion Uncomplicated books. So there is an opportunity coming up where you can join us in the month of April, specifically on April the 20th, for a live, not only just a discussion, but it's really going to be kind of a 2-hour immersive learning experience that's inspired by a lot of the concepts in the book. And so go and purchase your book and then secure your spot. My teammates are going to actually place the link where you can register into the chat, but we do hope to have a great cohort of individuals to be deeply engaged in Inclusion Uncomplicated and what that means. And so thank you in advance for considering this. Now, one of the things that we like to do here at NWC is give you a little bit of a head nod for what you have to look forward to in future weeks in terms of our Intentional Conversations guest co-host. And so we have coming up in March, the first one kicking off is going to be Dr. Teresa Horn. Really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be discussing ways to encourage male senior leadership to include Black women, how women of color can prepare for leadership roles, and techniques to stay mentally and emotionally healthy. And so if you don't know Dr. Teresa Horn, look her up. You're going to want to be here to join us. The week following, another tremendous guest co-host, Farrah Harris, is going to be joining us. And she talks all about EQ. Emotional intelligence is a big part of her messaging platform. And specifically the way that EQ helps to create belonging and psych safety in the workplace. And also self-care and work-life alignment is going to be a part of that dialogue too. So join us, mark your calendars, March 10th. Now, if you don't know Aubrey Blanche, again, this is another one. This lineup for March is fire, y'all. So make sure that you're spreading the word. Meet us here. We're going to be discussing equity versus diversity, bringing anti-ableism into DEI work and the process of diagnosing neurodiversity and approaching its disclosure at work. And so I love this topic. I am a parent of a neurodiverse son, and I cannot wait to really be in conversation with Aubrey and each of you. So be back here and join us on that date. On March 24th, Francine Forum. And we're going to be talking about women in the workplace and her recent book, which is titled, Please Sit Over There, How to Manage Power and Overcome Exclusion and Succeed as a Black Woman at Work. I told y'all the March lineup is fire. And so I hope that you all will be here. And then we will end the month with my friend, Anton Gunn, and we're going to be talking about how to inspire those you lead and create a positive legacy in their lives, creating quality communication within your organization, and how to build a culture that is caring, helpful, and trusting. Anton Gunn is also a very astute practitioner in this space. He has written several books, and so I'm sure we'll unpack a little bit about that journey when we have him here as our guest co-host. But save all the Fridays, right? From this hour, 11 to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you can't be here live, no worries. You always can catch the replay. But we also make all of our VodCast content available via podcast for those who just like to get their content in that way. And so thanks so much for marking those dates and joining us on those dates. Now, it does me great pleasure to formally introduce our guest co-host for today. And for those of you who are familiar with this podcast community, we always like to read people's accolades, their credentials. We read their bios because we want you to know what kind of value they're bringing to this conversation and why we were super excited about extending the invite. And so allow me to introduce Melinda Briana Epler. She has more than 25 years of experience elevating brands and developing business innovation strategies for startups, Fortune 500 companies, and global NGOs. As CEO of Change Catalyst, Melinda is a strategic diversity, equity, and inclusion advisor for executives, entrepreneurs, investors, and activists around the world. As part of her change-making work, she is an inclusive leadership coach. She trains executive and management teams and builds learning and development solutions for clients. Melinda is the author of How to Be an Ally by McGraw-Hill and the host of the popular Leading with Empathy and Allyship podcast, of which she had me on a while back, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I remember that conversation fondly. She is also a TED speaker, award-winning documentary filmmaker, and former marketing and culture executive. She speaks, mentors, and writes about diversity and inclusion, empathy, and entrepreneurship. So, podcast community, if you would take to the chat, find your favorite emoji, your favorite words and sentiments, whatever it is that feels right in the moment. But do me a favor and help me to welcome Melinda Briana Epler as our guest co-host today. Let her know how much we really appreciate her being here with us. And I am going to spotlight her so that I can bring her into the conversation. Melinda, we're so glad you're here. One of the first questions I always ask of my guest co-hosts is for them to take a moment to share something with us that we may not be able to learn about them from reading their bio or even looking at their LinkedIn profile. So if you could just take a moment to think about that question and then answer and then greet this audience in whatever other way that feels appropriate for you, we would love that. Welcome, my friend.
Hello, good to see you. And thank you for having me on. And hello, everybody. It looks like you're all across the US, and so yeah, I'm excited to be here. So I will say that I'm kind of an open book on social media, so I'm not sure there's a whole lot. But many people probably don't know that I ride motorcycles. My husband and I both ride motorcycles. I'm actually an ambassador for Revit, which is a motorcycle brand, apparel brand, and one of the few brands that actually designs for women. Not a lot there. Yeah. So on the weekends, we're often out riding our motorcycles around the Bay Area. And then we also, in August of last year, we take some longer trips. So in August of last year, we went from San Francisco all the way down to the end of Baja and back. So it was it was a month-long motorcycle trip. It was amazing.
Oh, no, that is incredibly exciting. And so it's given us a little bit of additional, insight into Melinda. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And it reminds me that you are on the West Coast. And so it's really super early for you. So thank you.
It is, yeah.
Thank you so much for saying yes to our invitation and getting up early on our behalf. We do appreciate that. So much of your work centers around empathy and allyship. And I value that. So I want to make sure that I give us a little bit of a deeper understanding as to why that has been your path. And so has your upbringing influenced your thoughts about allyship and empathy? Growing up, if you can answer for us, who had the most influence over you? And are there areas, Melinda, within your childhood that you wish would have better prepared you to understand marginalized groups? I know those are loaded questions all kind of buried in there together, but I feel like, yeah, there's a lot in there. But yeah, really interested about your background and how it has influenced the work that you do right now.
Yeah, so I grew up in Oakland, California, and then in Seattle, in the south part of Seattle. So I think I actually have kind of an unusual, I didn't know it was unusual at the time, but an unusual upbringing where I grew up in neighborhoods that were very diverse, and where I was often the minority in groups. And so I thought that was normal. And it wasn't until I got to college that I was like, wait a minute, everybody didn't grow up that way. And then I'm reflecting on it now, I realize that, as a result, that's probably one of the reasons why I do the work that I do, is to correct that. Once I realized when I was in college, not only is, there's a real lack of inclusion in our world, in our workplaces, and in equity. And so when I got to college, I kind of realized that there was a lot of work to do. That's when I kind of started to work to create change. And I will say, in terms of allyship, that wasn't a concept that any of us really knew at the time.
Right.
Yes, I work to create change, to correct inequities. Since when I was in high school, it was back in the Cold War, so that's aging me a bit. And I created a sister school with a school in the Soviet Union at the time, to bridge peace, because between our cultures, and so that our sister school was in Uzbekistan now. And was then part of the Soviet Union. And that in itself, that experience changed me quite a bit. But I will say that to answer the question about empathy, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit more, but I grew up in a family that didn't show a lot of empathy and didn't have a lot of empathy for each other. We didn't, in terms of like physical interactions, and facial expressions and so on. There wasn't much in my family. I didn't learn it from my family. I had to learn it afterwards. I realized that when I got to college that that's not how I wanted to show up in the world. So I really worked to create, to learn how to be empathetic, how to show empathy. And now I teach it. So, And I guess there was one other question in there about who influenced me most. There's no one answer. I read a lot of books, and certainly there were a lot of authors that really influenced me. And then in my family, I would say my grandfather probably influenced me most. He grew up in the Depression and was an entrepreneur and had this kind of way of creating opportunities and creating businesses when there were very few opportunities. And so he was scrappy and would and did a lot of different things to generate, I wouldn't even say wealth, but generate money and income. And I learned a lot from him. He was a very entrepreneurial spirit, and also lived to be 104. So that's something I aspire to.
That is amazing. I love all the stories that you were able to share just in answering those prompts. We talk often at NWC about the value of storytelling, and even the value of helping people to understand our DEI story, what anchors us right to this work. And even in what you just shared, I've identified a number of anchors, and I think it certainly helps us to have a deeper appreciation for how this work found you and how you found the work, right? And why it's now part of your everyday life. So yes, we are going to talk a lot about empathy today. And I want to dig in to talk about your understanding of how in which you see the relationship between empathy and leadership.
All good leaders have to have empathy and show empathy. That's the key, is not just having it, but showing it. We build insight about somebody. We really understand their world, experience their world, understand their world and what they're uniquely experiencing. And then the second part is showing that empathy, is really recognizing their unique experience. And then ultimately we'll talk about allyship is the next step, is, taking that and putting it into action. So, I mean, a good leader needs to be able to understand what's happening in their team's lives so that they can support them, so that they can motivate them the best way. So you need to build that empathy and understanding for where somebody wants to grow in their career, and support them along the way. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. And speak up and speak out when something is happening in the world that is impacting them, right? And if you're not doing that as a leader, you're going to lose people as well. You're not showing empathy. You're not reflecting the values that you might have around diversity, equity, inclusion if you're not actually speaking up or speaking out. And then also that checking in, right? Checking in when something is happening at home that is impacting somebody, because that impacts your work, that impacts your well-being and your ability to thrive both outside of the workplace and inside of the workplace. And lastly, one more is when somebody is experiencing exclusion, that empathy is essential. You need to be listening with empathy. And then once you understand the situation, working together to find a solution and supporting them, showing empathy, taking action.
No, I love all of that. I too am a big believer in the importance of leaders having great level of empathy. I think that it's what allows us to have our compassionate nature to help support colleagues, and particularly those, to your point, that may be part of marginalized communities and have a different set of challenges to navigate within the workplace. And that's why I love connecting it back to stories, is because I think that one of the best ways for someone to be able to fuel that level of empathy for someone is to hear them share a story and to be vulnerable enough to share their story as well. And so stories connect us. And I think that level of connection is very much a part of leaning into that empathy and that care that is shown.
And I think that one of the things as a leader, leaders need to be doing is developing a space for their teams to tell those stories about themselves so that they can learn about each other, so they can build empathy for each other. Because once we build more empathy for each other, we're less likely to harm each other through words and actions. We're less likely to let biases be kind of our default, right? We're actually, there's a real person, we understand them. We're not defaulting to our biases so much. We're sometimes questioning our biases. We're unlearning some things as we get to know each other better.
It takes intentionality. That's what I'm hearing. It takes intentionality for that.
Yeah.
And so if someone, I really love getting practical, right? Peeling back all the layers, getting to the root cause. And so we're talking about empathy. We're talking about the intersection of empathy and leadership. But for someone who is questioning whether or not they are an empathetic leader, what would you say to them that allows them to self-assess? What does that look like in action? Being an empathetic leader.
So how do they assess whether they're an empathetic leader?
Yeah.
I think you.
Is it one of those things where either you know or you don't?
No, I think that if you're a truly empathetic leader, your team is going to tell you.
Yeah.
It's, my team regularly talks about how important it is that I did this, important it is I did that. And thank you for really listening in this moment. Thank you. There's nothing I needed except to have you listen. Right. And there's so many. So if you're really checking in with your team, if you're really having those one-on-one conversations and you're really showing empathy for them, they're probably going to let you know. And if they're not letting you know, then you might, work a little bit harder. And then
I would be a judge of that. It's other people. I love that, Melinda. It's, really we get our cues from other people. Do they sense that we're showing up as an empathetic leader? I think that's important. Yeah. Finish your thought.
What was I going to say? I lost it.
It's totally fine. I threw you off. It's just totally fine. Okay,
it's all good.
Allyship. Yeah, let's talk about how empathy shows up in ally work.
Yeah, so allyship is empathy in action at its core, right? Yeah. So we're learning about each other, we're building that empathy, and then we're showing empathy, and then the last piece is we're taking action in support. And so in order to be able to take that action and support, you need to build empathy for somebody. You need to really build an understanding of how you can best support them, right? So empathy and allyship go hand in hand. I actually don't think you're going to be a good ally if you don't have empathy first.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you don't have it first, I like that, because oftentimes it's that level of empathy that drives us to want to be an ally, to want to be able to support others that may not be as privileged as we are, or don't have maybe full opportunity for success. And so we want to advocate for them. So I love that. So tell me something you think is true about allyship that most people either agree with or don't agree with. I actually want you to answer both of that, either agree with or they don't agree with. What are some of those misnomers about allyship?
I think a big one is, I don't have time. I don't have time to be an ally. I don't have time for allyship. Really, they're saying I don't have time for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I don't have time for allyship. And it's, it takes a moment, right? And there, if you think back into how allies have really impacted you in your life, it's often the little moments that, took 30 seconds or, maybe took 5 minutes. That's it. It's not a long time consuming thing. You don't have to know everything. I guess this is the second one. You don't have to know everything in order to be an ally, in order to be a good ally, right? None of us know everything, right? I wrote a book on it and I still am learning, right? It's still a work in progress. We're all still learning. It's a journey. And the key is to do something. Because when you're not doing, and I think that's maybe the third is that, as long as I might be fearful that I'm going to do harm if I take action and it's not the right action, but in actuality, that if you're not doing something, you might be creating more harm.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Right?
Yeah.
I think that one misnomer around being an ally, although there's some really practical things people can do and probably put into their daily habits, immediately, but it also takes learning about what true allyship is. And I think sometimes we forget that that's also important, right? I believe that in order for us to be effective at being an ally, because allyship is all about action, but it's not just any action, it's useful action, which means how do we ensure that our actions of supporting are useful? We have to get proximate to the lived experiences of those in which we're allying for. And if those aren't our experiences, we really don't know too much about it, to your point, Melinda. So we have to make sure that we're always on this constant learning journey.
Yeah.
And
learning
that's
and okay.
Learning and unlearning. I think that's where you were
or
going,
learning
right?
and unlearning. Exactly.
Yes.
And then relearning,
Yes.
right? We want to relearn and with new perspectives and skills.
Yeah. So there's so much talk these days, and even I would venture to say criticism about how brands and individual leaders are falling into the trap of performative allyship, right? And so I want to get you just to express your thoughts on that. What is your take on how people can avoid falling into the trap of being perceived as their allyship, being performative, or even, I'm saying perceived because I wanted people to benefit of the doubt, but sometimes maybe it is because they are deeply rooted and motivated by what this is going to do for self versus what it's going to do for someone else. And so talk a little bit about performative allyship and how to avoid it.
Yeah. So performative allyship is essentially when you say you're an ally, or you say you're an ally, but the actions don't actually follow that, right? That you may, as a brand, you may change your logo this month to reflect Black History Month, next month to reflect Women's History Month, and the next month to reflect Pride, but you're not actually doing internally to create the systemic inequities against marginalized people with underrepresented identities in your workplace, right? So that's performative allyship at the brand level, is like doing it for marketing sake without actually doing the internal work of creating the much needed change. Really creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive company. And so performative allyship, I think, comes from people not building that understanding, that empathy, and really acting in support. Like, if you really understand how somebody wants to be supported as an ally, your actions should follow that, right? And so if you're really doing that work, if you're really doing that work, then you're not likely to be performative, right? But you have to do that a little bit of work to really build empathy, to really learn and unlearn and relearn. A lot of brands will do one thing over here that's really great. They'll have ERGs, they'll have they may have like a whole series of events for Black History Month, but then there are whole teams where internally there's microaggressions and biases happening regularly on those teams where Black people don't feel safe on their teams, where they have compensation inequity across race and gender, right? And when you look at their team, you see that if there's diversity on their team, it's the marginalized people are at the bottom, they're not at the leadership level, right? So there can be some kind of levels of performative, or in some parts of companies, they can be performative, where other parts, they're really genuinely working on change too. It's not all black and white, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. I love that you brought to the conversation the optics of it, right? And while optics aren't everything, it's context, and it is important in shaping people's perceptions and helping them to understand the level of credibility, or the lack thereof, that organizations really should be assigned to their commitment from a DEI perspective. We often say that diversity is broad, right? It's not just about the optics of age, race, gender, right? Those are really important dimensions, and we can't deny them at all. In fact, they should be prioritized in many regards, but there are also many, dimensions of diversity that are part of the equation. But what I often say is that we have to attack the optics, right? Because if we don't attack the optics, then it's hard for someone to really appreciate when an organization will tout its leadership and commitment if time after time after time, decade after decade, we're still seeing the same thing over and over again without that change, evidence of that change, because that means that maybe the due diligence and the rigor is not being exercised the way that it needs to. And so, I just wanted to highlight that because yes, and I'm sure you hear this a lot too, Melinda. There's so much criticism around how many brands, particularly after George Floyd's murder, it's like everyone was really just settling into, okay, we have to now get engaged. We have to do something. This is now a higher priority for us. But how which they were showing up and delivering upon that in many ways was performative, and it was causing more harm. And so I appreciate that we are, as practitioners, as a body of, as a collective, that we are continuing to put this at the forefront of these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that's still going on too, right?
Oh yeah.
Brands have, several brands, they internally, they had conversations, they may have had some events and then that was it. Or they hired one person to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then didn't give them budgets or support to do their work effectively. I mean, there's so many different ways that that's still playing out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely true.
So I know that your book is about allyship and empathy, but I want you to give us a little bit more of what people can expect if they get your book. Is more of a guide? What are some of the key takeaways that you often like to socialize, to excite people about this wonderful tool?
Yeah. Well, the book is full of actionable steps you can take to be an ally. I wrote it because I saw so many people wanting to take action, but not knowing what to do, and seeing allyship as this kind of nebulous concept and not having a really a real way to start learning deeply and then taking action. And so it's a menu of actions with some skills building and tools included. And I would say, it's a guide, and it's a beginning. Or if you're in the middle of your work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I suspect you'll still find some gems in there, because I really looked at allyship for people of all different underrepresented identities, and the reality is that most of us still have more work to do in that, in different, in really learning about different identities, what biases might be coming up, what microaggressions might be coming up, and other ways that people might be impacted. I go through 7 different steps for being an ally in the book, and there's some exercises along the way and ways to really deepen your work and learning as well.
I love it. And we have placed a link to your book into the chat. Awesome. So I hope this community will definitely take advantage of that and get that book and see it as a tool and a resource for you. So you said 7 steps to becoming an ally. We won't have you give away all of the things, but if there's maybe 1 or 2 really critical steps that you feel like you just get, you enjoy talking about maybe more than the others. I'm sure all of them are important and they work together, but what would be maybe the 1 or 2 that you would like to share a bit more about with this audience?
Well, we talked a lot about learning and unlearning and relearning, right? That's step 1. Step 2 is to do no harm. And so is really understanding and correcting our biases. That's number 1. That's kind of the foundation. And then recognizing and overcoming our microaggressions. And microaggressions are ways that our biases might be coming through in our words and actions and creating harm. And so in the book, there are tables of different biases that might be occurring in the workplace, tables of different microaggressions that might be coming to play in the workplace. And so the first step is our own internal work, right? Of learning what those biases and microaggressions are, and doing the self-regulation, that internal work of pausing and really making sure that biases aren't coming up in our words and actions before we speak, act, make decisions. And then the next step is to stand up for what's right, is to really take action and interrupt biases and microaggressions. And so there's a whole chapter on what that looks like to interrupt microaggressions. There's some scripts in there there's a process and some scripts in there to really help guide you and give you some ideas, because in the moment that a microaggression happens, it happens so quickly that sometimes we're in shock ourselves. Like, I can't believe what just happened. Right. And so having some scripts at the ready can help you to actually take action in that moment. And so Yeah, I guess, and then, I don't want to leave out advocacy. That is really important as well. So there's a whole chapter on how do you advocate for people? What does that look like? What are the different types of advocacy, and leading the change? How we can all be leaders and lead the change.
No, it sounds like a terrific tool. And I have my book on order, so I cannot wait to dig in and be in conversation with you about it. You use language, you said bystander. And I heard someone the other day said, I tend to prefer to use, upstander, because when you're bystanding, it almost sounds a little bit like you're a little bit passive about jumping in. And we need people to really move with some sense of urgency. And so I just found that to be interesting. So as you mentioned that word, it came to mind for me.
It's absolutely true. You can't, allyship is not about sitting on the sidelines. It's about taking action.
Exactly. Exactly. And what I love about the approach you've taken to your book, which is similar to the mindset that I have when I was writing my book. I want it to be a guide, a tool, a resource. I think that oftentimes when we find ourselves in those situations, the reason that we walk away regretting that we didn't say what we thought we should have said, or we didn't do what we thought we should have did, is because we weren't prepared. And so it brings me to my next question, which is, how do we, Melinda, get people to take more of a proactive approach to upskilling themselves around being an ally, instead of just, okay, I'm in the moment, it happens, and then I was not prepared? I feel like there's a difference between being, proactive than being reactive. And how can we help people to understand that, again, just like most of the tools and how in which we develop ourselves, it takes us being upskilled around that. And it looks like maybe getting your book and, participating in other conversations that helps us to have those tools in our back pocket that we can pull out in the moment of need. So do you have any thoughts about how we can get people to shift from a reactive to more of a proactive approach to upskilling around this?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. One is actually learning. You need to better understand what microaggressions are, and what microaggressions might be happening, and be able to name that. That helps a lot. And so learning about microaggressions, and then learning some scripts, and making them your own, right? You want to make those scripts your own, and doing all of that before you get into a situation where you're going to need it, right? And so you do that pre-work of learning and developing those skills. You consistently put it into practice, right? And you can put it into practice in your friends group as well, right? Not just at work, but start practicing it with your friends, start practicing it with your family. I mean, that makes it's easier to do with your family, right? So start taking some actions with your family too, because we all have biases and microaggressions that come up in our families and our friends, right? And then, so that's one is to learn. The second would be to put it into practice. And you can do it not just at work, but outside of work as well. If you're a leader, there's a lot of things that you can do proactively to reduce biases and microaggressions to begin with, so they're less likely to happen, right? Absolutely. Whether that's creating better meeting processes and structures, that's educating your team around biases and microaggressions, because once you start doing that, then you all have the same kind of vocabulary, foundational vocabulary, and you can start calling each other in. So you call each other in to learn when a bias comes up. Everybody knows about biases. You can, as a leader, say, you know what, are any biases coming up right now? Because I'm thinking there might be. And then you talk about it together, what biases are coming into play here. And then you can find a solution together to make sure that that's not happening in the future, and change that. So the education and the creating processes also are really huge in being proactive.
Yeah, that's why I'm really a big fan of learning experiences that allows for role playing, or maybe giving people scenarios and they have to think through, what would your actions be as an ally, in this particular scenario. I think that's important because I don't know about you, Melinda, but how many times have we found ourselves in conversations with someone where they just openly share that I just routinely go and I just role play with people around, if you were to say this is how I would show up as an ally. No, we have to almost create those experiences, right? Because I don't think that many of us are just going to do that on our own. And again, I think that goes back to being proactive and really committed to this versus, just reactive. And so I want to
Yeah.
talk about process bias, because we talk about how, people have bias, and we know that it's just our human nature. And so we can do all the things to try to prevent ourselves from bias showing up, but we're not going to be able to do that 100%. It's going to show up because we are humans.
Mhm.
But I think that sometimes we spend so much effort on trying to correct the bias in people that we don't talk enough about process bias.
Right.
And I just want to get your take on that, because people are the ones who are developing processes, right? They're the ones who are facilitating the process.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to do both, right? You have to work on the individuals, because the individuals are the ones that are reinforcing the processes, creating the processes, reinforcing the processes, right?
Yeah.
And the processes themselves and the systems behind those processes,
Yes.
right? So there's so many different biases that come into play in our hiring system, in our hiring processes, right? From every single step of the way, from writing the job description. How are we writing that job description? Who are we really trying to appeal to in that job description? Is it actually inviting people with underrepresented identities to your company? Often it's not. Often we're actually signaling that we don't want people with underrepresented identities to come to our workplace. So it's all the way from the job descriptions and your outreach, where are you reaching out to candidates? Are you going just to the networks of people that are working in the company that is not a diverse company, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's going to be some issues right there, right?
Absolutely.
So that's just the beginning of the process. And then all the way through the interview, the same thing. The offer is another really key place where inequity really takes hold from the very beginning of somebody first working in that workplace. Is if your offer is not equitable with offers of other people that you've given the same job to, right? That's where the pay gap, the compensation gap starts, and it continues throughout people's careers, because as you get promotions, you're getting percentages, you're not getting yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think this question in some, maybe markets, geographies may be illegal, but, there used to be, it used to be common practice for a lot of hiring managers and recruiters to ask, what's your current salary? And it's because they're trying to match instead of really trying to align it with what's commensurate value. And so I'm loving the conversations and the greater transparency. It's still a long way to go, but I'm loving the greater transparency that's occurring around, trying to prevent some of those inequities in areas such as pay.
Yeah.
So as we said, bias is going to show up. Go ahead. Seems like you wanted to comment on that. I'd love for you to.
Yeah. So the next step is being transparent about what the salary is on the job description. And I would say that's not enough, because I know somebody recently who was interviewing for a job, and they were interviewing, right? And so a recruiter reached out to them and said, hey, would you interview for this role? And the person was like, the salary is really low on that. But they interviewed anyway. And in that interview, they talked about how low the salary was. And they were like, oh yeah, we can bring that up. Not everybody's going to have that conversation. Not everybody knows to have that conversation, right? And there's in addition to the compensation gap, there's an expectation gap as well, because people with underrepresented identities have for so long been underpaid. We expect to be paid less, right? And that's just, if you're offering less, that's perpetuating that inequity. If you're not offering the same amount, yeah.
No, absolutely. 100%. So I'm going to
that's performative, right? Just to go back to that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Going back to performative. I see that a hand is up. And so I do want to go to that question before I ask my next question. And I do want to also take this opportunity just to invite the audience that if you have a question, use the raise hand feature. It lets me know that you're willing to be spotlighted, and unmute yourself and share. Or I'm also watching the chat, so I would love to bring your voice to the conversation. And Tracy, welcome. You are one of our repeat attendees, so it's always great to see you and have you. Present your question or commentary. Thank you.
So, thank you. I have two questions. I'll try to be brief. The first one is, what do you do when people say that they have over empathized and they just it's almost like leading to some type of burnout or physical overwhelm on their part if they're an ally and they're overwhelmed. I always say I don't get to opt out because the color of my skin, I can't just say, oh, I'm overwhelmed. I have to be Black all day. But that's a different story. So what do you say to people that feel that way? And the second part is, do you believe empathy is a innate quality, or is it something that you can actually grow into? Thank you.
I'll answer the second question first, actually. It is not an innate quality. I shared early at the beginning that I grew up in a family that did not show empathy. I didn't learn how to show empathy when I was younger. My family just didn't do that. We didn't share emotions. And so I realized that's not how I wanted to show up in the world. So I took action to really, what does empathy look like? I actually worked on some research projects to really understand empathy. What does that look like? What does it look like on our faces? What does it look like embodied, right? What does it look like to listen with empathy? And then what does it look like to show empathy? What do I need to know in order to be able to do that effectively? So I am an example, and also research shows that you can, there's lots of research that shows that you can develop empathy and that empathy can be learned. The first question you asked around that burnout or of over empathizing, or compassion fatigue is the other term for it, right? Is real, and I would say that diversity, equity, the people that are working on it daily, on this work daily, can have compassion fatigue. There's a lot of turnover in diversity, equity, and inclusion roles inside of companies because this work is hard. It's undervalued, and you're taking on you're listening to so many people. You're taking on the emotions of so many people, and you're and then trying to take action on that. And if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not allowing, doing work, I would say it's mindfulness work, because you have to get it out of your brain and your emotions. But you also have to get it out of your body, because you can take it on in your body as well, and your spirit too, right? And that's why we have a lot of burnout in diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, and it's unfortunate, and companies can do better there, and by acknowledging that. But I think your question was more around people that say, well, I just don't, I don't have any more room for empathy to be a good ally, right? And in that case, one thing is, I do think that you can step out from time to time, but you have to step back in. Right. If you really, everybody from time to time needs some to be refilled. And I was talking to, I actually went on a meditation retreat in December for a week, because I needed to be refilled. And my meditation teacher said, you've got to fill your stuff up till it overflows. Right. And once it overflows, then you can help other people. And so, yes, there is that. And I think all of us who are practitioners, all of us who are underrepresented, all of us who experience marginalization regularly need to do some of that. And there's still room to do little things that can make a big difference in somebody's life. It doesn't take very much, and you're absolutely right that, some of us don't have the ability to just turn it off, right? Because it's daily, it's hourly, it's regularly. So find that motivation, find that way to take action.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tracy. Really insightful questions. Appreciate you being here today. Melinda, compassion fatigue is incredibly real. And I love the fact that you amplify that it is okay if we are feeling that our emotional capacity is not there for us to be an effective ally, to step back and that season and that moment, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that we need to stay there indefinitely, right? There's an ultimate goal here, which is to get back at it, right? Yeah. But we can't pour from an empty cup. So I appreciate everything that you said. Some people are just naturally wired to always feel like they need to be on and available for other people, that we don't necessarily lean into that self-care that's needed. And so I just appreciate the balance approach that you brought to your response for that. And I also love the mindfulness and the self-awareness, because that allows you to know, what kind of position am I in right now? What state am I in right now? What, how full is my cup right now? And without that pausing and that self-reflection, we could just continue to keep going like the Energizer Bunny. And then it's like we shut ourselves down, or something else, uncontrollable shuts us down, because we have not taken the time to really reflect and assess, how am I showing up right now? And what do I need right now? And how do I satisfy that so that I can be at my best to do the work of supporting others and as an ally? So I love that.
Yeah.
You said something.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you said something else as you were sharing with Tracy, but you said that empathy has a certain look about it. And I'm paraphrasing here, but you said, even like, what is your face doing? What is your body doing? And it led me to just, consider that sometimes our empathy has a lot to do with our body language as much as what we're saying and what we're doing in the moment. And so I know that you referenced that your research kind of touched a little bit on that. What are some high-level takeaways and maybe some tips that you can share with this audience for people who want to be a bit more intentional about making sure their body posture and their facial expressions is one that supports, being an empathetic leader?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really important whether we're in person. This is the in-person meeting, in physical locations in the same meeting, right? Or we're virtually as well. When we're virtual, we're only seeing this part of ourselves, and so all of that is amplified. All our facial expressions are amplified, and so when you're going from meeting to meeting, sometimes you can carry the last meeting on your face and your body, right? Perhaps, if that last meeting was frustrating, perhaps that last meeting was hard. And so you come into a meeting, you're like, like you're not really giving, you're not really presenting in a way that is going to bring out the best in people in that meeting, right? So you have to take a moment to reset, that mindfulness again, right? You have to take a moment to reset. You might be really stressed out about something else that's going on in your life, right? And then you just, for a moment, just reset. How do I want to present in this moment for this team, for the people on this call? For, if you're actively listening and really paying attention, it's going to make a big difference to the person on the other end. If they're presenting something, if they are nervous, if they're, just having a bad day, your presence can make a difference for them. And that's like, when we talk about, like, it's not that hard to be an ally. It's just, nodding and really paying attention makes a big difference.
I love that.
That active listening, that showing that you're listening makes a big difference.
And the intentionality around the check-ins, that is, in essence, if you're asking, how are you showing up to this meeting? That is giving people space and time. I think that is part of the, the empathetic nature of a leader showing forth. So that's awesome. So you have a major release, I understand, that's coming up in April. And I would love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can't talk about everything because it's coming, it's still a ways away. But we are, I can say that we're launching a new brand, and we provide learning and development solutions for empowering people to create change, right? And so we have an e-learning platform that we're launching. We've been piloting it for some time, and we're ready to launch it. So in April, we will be launching our e-learning, which will allow individuals, so anybody who wants to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, to learn on their own. And then also for startups and corporate entities, they'll now be able to roll out diversity, equity, and inclusion learning at scale across their organizations.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love that. I think something that we have to lean into a bit more as practitioners and facilitators of learning in this space of DEI is that people learn differently, right? And so, we have to make sure that we have multiple ways and multiple modalities for people to deepen their own learning and understanding. Some people are very much focused and receive better outcomes when they're on their own learning journey path, right? So it's kind of self-paced that they're able to, but then some people are like, I need to be in the presence of others. I need to be able to socialize around how I'm processing this information. So I love that you're adding that to your platform. And we look forward to hearing more about it in April when the time comes for you to be able to unveil all the things about it.
I appreciate you. Thank you for asking.
No, absolutely. So we just have a few more minutes here left today, and I'm checking the chat to make sure I haven't missed any questions. I am seeing some good commentary there, though, so would engage.
I love it.
I would certainly invite this community to make sure you're paying attention to the chat. But what have I not asked you about today that you have a lot of energy and passion around and that you want to socialize?
Oh,
I know it could be anything under the umbrella of just anything. If there's something that's going on that's really significant that you feel like it's worthy of sharing with this community, I want to give you that chance and opportunity to do so. Big question, I know.
yeah, it is. It is. I think there's so many different assumptions that everybody makes around empathy and allyship in particular, that I encourage everybody to really think about something that they might have just not thought of, something that they're not really learning about, no matter who we are. I mean, I am still working on being a better ally for different people with different types of disabilities, right? And it's a lifelong journey because there's always more to learn. So I encourage everybody listening, everybody watching, to really think about what is that, is there something that I can still learn, and then take action and learn it. And then take action and perhaps have a conversation with somebody that you don't normally have a conversation with, and really start to build deeper empathy for them, show empathy for their experience, and then, take action and support. Yeah. What does that look like? That might be, now it could be a number of things. It's really building in that moment of understanding that you'll find the answer to what allyship looks like.
Yeah, no, I love that, Melinda. And I did notice that there was a question in the chat that I did not see before. So while we have just a bit more time, I want to see if I can sneak this one in as well. But the question pertains to sometimes when we have good intentions and we are being an ally, we want to make sure that we aren't overstepping boundaries where it will cause someone to feel disempowered, right? And so what are some tips that you have around balancing that?
Just to reiterate again, the point of really understanding where somebody wants support is crucial. And we have to make assumptions that, I think actually, just as an example, mentorship is, we often think somebody doesn't have the skills that they need. And so we start to mentor them. Perhaps they already have the skills and they just need opportunities. They just need doors opened up for them. They need a sponsor. Exactly. Exactly. They need a sponsor. So we sometimes make assumptions that somebody doesn't have the skills that they need to get ahead, but perhaps they do have those skills. They just haven't been given the opportunities. How can you as an ally then take action and give them opportunities, recommend them for opportunities, amplify their voice so that they get more opportunities? There's lots of different ways that you can support them, but you need to know whether or not they have those skills before making that assumption. So just as an example, I think also sometimes that comes up when you're deciding whether or not to interrupt a microaggression, right? You, in that moment, are you going to cause more harm by highlighting that happened, and that's a real question. You have to gauge in that moment. Are you going to cause more harm to the person that's already experiencing microaggression, or and so you need to gauge in that moment. There's no perfect answer. There's no one answer. And I would say part of it is checking back in with that person afterwards. If you interrupted a microaggression, check in with the person that experienced the microaggression, see how they're doing. How can you support them? Is what you did something that it was helpful or not? And talk about it. Have a discussion. Have a vulnerable discussion. If you want to be a good ally, you have to have those conversations.
I love that. And Takia placed into the chat, just making yourself open for feedback. We have to, again, that's that learning, unlearning, relearning. Yes. And being okay with whatever worked or didn't work in that one situation, may have the opposite impact in another situation. So don't feel defeated if the feedback is, you know what, you really embarrassed me and I wish you had not have done that for XYZ reasons. That's that person in that situation. And don't let that cause us to go back to the sidelines, right?
Yeah.
We have to stay at it, knowing that we're constantly having to figure this out and navigate, but just be open to that journey and that learning process.
Yeah. And that you're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I mean, that's a part of the learning journey. When we make a mistake, we apologize for it, right? We correct any harm that we might have been caused. And then we keep going. We learn from it. We do better next time. And that is so important as a part of the process of allyship, is that learning. Again, you are always learning. And you need to forgive yourself when you do make a mistake.
Right. Extend grace to yourself and to others. I love this. So much great nuggets that we've had the opportunity to hear you share during this hour of time. And we are now at the top of the hour. We have shared your information, Melinda, into the chat for this community. And there's some folks who are already saying in the chat they want you to come speak at their organizations. And so there's been some great value. But thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. We really do appreciate it. I also want to thank each of you as our audience, and even those who joined live via LinkedIn, for being here with us. If this information has been useful to you, then once the podcast releases and the replay is out, which will be, again, just pretty much today over the weekend, we'd love for you to share it out with those in your network. So thanks so much for being here. Have a great and safe weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.